western desert is a place fit only for war. Thousands of square miles are nothing but sand and stone. A compass is as necessary, once off the road, as it is to a sailor at sea. Water doesn't exist until you bore deep into the earth. You bath in your shaving mug. Flies have the tenacity of bulldogs. Bruises readily turn to desert sores. Days that are very hot can be followed by nights of bitter cold. When the hot comes-in wind brings its sandstorms, life can be intolerable. The Arabs say that after 5 days of it, murder can be excused. The tide of this war in the desert has ebbed and flowed. But as Rommel advanced after we lost Tobruk, never had our backs been so close to the Suez Wall. We had lost 80,000 men and much booty. Of defense on which General Auchinleck might have Sidi Barani or Mercer Matruh, for example. But he was deliberately falling back on El Alamein, no more than 60 miles from Alexandria. To Rommel, advancing at considerable speed, Egypt, with the Nile Delta which gives it life, Cairo, British General Headquarters and Africa's principal city, Alexandria, Egypt's chief port and base of our Mediterranean fleet, and Suez, gateway to the Far East. All these must have seemed dazzlingly near as a mirage, and as it proved, as much an illusion. It was a wise decision of General Auchinleck's to come back to El Alamein, much the strongest natural line of defense between the Libyan frontier and the Delta. Moreover, Rommel's lines of supply were here stretched to the limit. On the right, our flank rested on the sea. On the left, it approached the Qattara Depression, a trough the size of Wales, 1/3 of it salt marsh, and all of it territory that no vehicle can cross. On this 40 miles front, General Auchinleck took personal command. His the total responsibility. Not another yard back were we going. His much depleted army dug, blasted, and wired itself in, and laid protective mines. Our front was one of discontinuous belts of minefields with strong points, and machine gun and anti-tank gun emplacements. But it was as yet extremely slender. Here, General Auchinleck waited, and with him, men who had fought at Gazala and Sidi Rezek, others who had been twice to Benghazi, others who had escaped from Bir Hakeim and Tobruk. The 8th Army had made a fighting retreat of 400 miles, and a battle which approached in its importance the Battle of Britain was now at hand. The Middle East, Suez, and infinitely more was at stake. The crucial days had come. line held. After several days of attack and counterattack, the British, Australians, Indians, and South Africans were still there, fighting as dogged as our infantry at Waterloo. The immediate crisis was past, but anxiety remained. Into this situation stepped Mr. Churchill, bringing his own inspiration and vigor. He brought good news of reinforcements both in men and supplies which had already rounded the Cape. For 5 days he visited the Army and Air Force, explaining the task and its importance. And most dramatic of all, he brought new commanders, General Alexander and General Montgomery. Alexander, one of the last men out of Dunkirk, and whose small army withstood the Japanese the whole length of Burma, and Montgomery, who took over the 8th Army. A man who lives as sternly as a Cromwell, and who is as much a part of his modern Ironsides. Battles swallow up weapons faster than you can build them. At home in Britain, the machinery of war poured from the factories. And British women worked alongside men on the shells, the ships, the tanks, the aircraft, the explosives. In no country are women so thoroughly organized for war. In the United States, bigger and more powerful tanks were coming off the assembly line. The Shermans, for instance, with their 75mm guns and all-round traverse, going to Egypt for the first time. Although American material used at El Alamein was but a small proportion of the whole, it was vital to our success. Army had the longest lines of supplies that the history of war has ever known. There are two main routes to the Middle East from Britain and America. The first by sea round the Cape, 12,000 miles menaced by U-boats, which nothing but the resolution of our merchant seamen and the Navy's guard over them has kept open. And the second by air across the middle of Africa, over the Niger, and then north along the Nile Valley. Landing grounds have been cut from the jungle. On this route fly aircraft brought by ship to ports on the west coast and there assembled. The work has its own problems, among them malaria. behind the line, great reinforcements. In the line, Rommel had come for us again. It was 2 months later. He told his troops that on this day they were going to Cairo. But 5 days afterwards, he withdrew. He left nearly 300 tanks behind to prove his generalship. In 2 or 3 months, we recreated and greatly enlarged the 8th Army. Into Middle East ports came men from the United Kingdom, India, and South Africa. The 44th Home Counties Division and the 51st Highlands Division had actually left Britain in May and June. And it was at the time Tobruk fell that President Roosevelt, who had Mr. Churchill with him at the time, ordered the first Sherman tanks to Egypt. Long-range planning was yielding its reward. The Air Force kept guard. Rommel, with a supply line 1/10 the length of ours, was himself building up his supplies as hard as he could go. But for a considerable proportion of them, there was no future. Our United Air Forces saw to that. The Royal Navy and Fleet Air Arm also were busy destroying Rommel's convoys. Within a few weeks, our Mediterranean submarines sank or damaged 24 enemy ships. In August alone, of all that was shipped to him, 80% went to the bottom. Meanwhile, the 8th Army trained to the last ounce.
The physical fitness and hardness of an army is one of the biggest battle-winning factors in war. When two first-class fighters meet, he who sticks it longest wins in the end. This has been proved time and time again, and applies to all ranks, from general officers to private soldiers. And this includes all branches of the army, whatever their job and wherever they be. Fighting fit and fit to fight.
Towards the middle of October, preparations on both sides were nearing completion. In the north, Rommel's forces stretched from the coast to a point 10 miles inland. Here were the bulk of his German infantry, comprising the 90th Light and the 164th Divisions, together with the Italian Trieste Division. In the south, holding a front of 14 miles, were 3 Italian divisions. These were strengthened by the rest of his German infantry. The center was left deliberately weak, held by a single Italian division, the Bologna, holding a front of 16 miles. Behind the infantry in the north were 2 armored divisions, 1 German and 1 Italian, and similarly in the south. The British line began in the north with the 9th Australians, and below them the 1st South Africans. The 51st Highland Division, who had St. Valery to avenge, and the 4th Indian Division, veterans of Abyssinia and the Western Desert, held the center. In the south were the 50th Division from the Tees and Tyne, with the fighting French of Bir Hakeim and contingents of Greeks. The tactical reserve was found by the 44th Division from counties close to London. Our armored divisions were 3, all United Kingdom men. Some veterans of a score of desert battles, others new to the work. 1 division, the famous 7th, held the extreme south. The other 2 were in close support in the north, with the 2nd New Zealand Infantry Division alongside. Rommel was full of confidence. He was saying to journalists in Berlin, "You may rely on our holding fast to what we have got. We hold the gateway to Egypt with the full intention to act."
Man kann sich auch verlassen. Was wir haben, halten wir fest.
Hitler was experiencing one of his historic intuitions. He saw before him the destined conqueror of Egypt, and on him he bestowed the baton of Field Marshal. Rommel hoped that if we attacked first, we should strike at his center. That hope we deliberately encouraged by the disposition of our forces. Having allowed our armor to break through, he saw himself destroying it by attacks from both flanks. That done, his own offensive would be launched. General Alexander, Admiral Harwood, and Air Marshal Tedder planned El Alamein together. It was to be a joint operation. Unity of command had become a reality. In the desert itself, General Montgomery and Air Vice Marshal Cunningham lived cheek by jowl. There was no divided command, said General Montgomery. There was only one command. General Montgomery, realizing that a citizen army fights best when it knows exactly what's going on and what it is going to do, saw to it that the plan of battle was known to everybody, from general to private soldier. And it came down from one rank to another till the chain was complete, so that senior officers fighting in their 3rd desert winter shared the knowledge with troopers going into action for the first time. The battle was against fixed lines. And against fixed lines, General Alexander said, the tactics are just like breaking down a wall with a crowbar. You drive it in as far as possible, and then lever this way and that to make a small hole. Then you enlarge it. As soon as you have made a hole large enough, your armored divisions go through to wreck the enemy's artillery and lines of communication. As for General Montgomery, he said his intention was to hit the enemy for 6 right out of Africa. The final preparations began. And now that all knew what was to be done, and all was made ready, there were final moments of normal desert life, of rest, of washing clothes, of a swim in the sea for those near the coast, of cooking the evening meal. The coming of dawn over the Mediterranean, the sunset with a touch of green in the horizon, the mirage turning sand into water and sprinkling that water with the sails of small ships. Many a soldier saw these things, perhaps for the first time, and he wrote his letters home and smoked and talked things over, or lay silent as he listened to the pipes playing Highland Laddie. The Battle of El Alamein began in the evening. As light failed, the final moves were made. The Eighth Army watched Rommel's lines, lying in moonlight and shadow.
At 0 minus 30, the barrage begins. At the same moment, the sappers will move forward to clear gaps in the enemy minefield, marking the gaps in white tape. After 30 minutes, the barrage will lift from the first objective and creep forward. At 0 hour, 10 o'clock, the infantry will advance.
By early morning, the first objectives were in our hands. The barrage had done its work. The guns had been heard in Alexandria, 60 miles away. The enemy had been taken partly by surprise. Our infantry was in their pajamas. But elsewhere, fighting was severe. There was a good deal of bayonet work. And now our forces moved up, consolidating and advancing further. Infantry, tanks, and air force working as one. After a hard day's fighting, the 8th Army had made a salient in the north 6 miles wide and to a depth 4 miles beyond the first enemy minefield. Next day, attacks were made in the center and south. The attacks that Rommel had been expecting and which he thought were the real thing. But they were merely diversions. In fact, our main attack was to be in the north. The 8th Army's crowbar had been driven in and was being levered this way and that. In our salient, the Australians were attacking again and secured a 3-mile front running west-northwest. Rommel counterattacked repeatedly during these days, both on the ground and in the air. The Air Force was doing a magnificent job. For the Luftwaffe, the skies became a place of deadly peril, and the machines that escaped us there were destroyed on the ground. On the 4th day of the battle, Kidney Ridge was assaulted by troops of the 7th Armored Division, riflemen, light tanks, and armored cars. Ridge was taken. In the meantime, the Australians, backed by British tanks, were exploiting their former northward thrust and driving a wedge still further into the German forces near the sea. Rommel was now fighting back with little pause and with increasing desperation. Days' bitter work cut off large numbers of Rommel's infantry, some of whom, for the time being, fought on isolated. Casualties suffered were heavy on both sides, but large groups of prisoners were in our hands. While the battle in the north was raging, Rommel had been forced to act. We had imposed our will on him. He moved two panzer divisions, the 21st and Ariete, from the south to just below our salient. The Air Force began the task of preventing them from concentrating. General Montgomery now gathered his entire armor, including his division from the south, ready for the crowbar's final thrust. The first phase was finished. On November the 1st, the 9th day of battle, the 8th Army advanced on its entire front of 40 miles. But the blow we meant to be mortal was struck at the head of the bulge. It was the breakthrough. Within 2 hours, our light tanks were 40 miles behind Rommel's line, destroying his transport. The result was consternation and chaos. The moment that Alexander and Montgomery had been waiting for had come. The entire weight of their armor was in readiness, and like a fleet of ironclads, it sailed through the gap. Its purpose was simple: to destroy Rommel's armor. day, November the 3rd, the heaviest armored battle of the campaign had been waged. Fighting went on along the whole front, but it was centered on El Akatia, where a tank battle of the bitterest kind reached hour by hour a deeper and more bloody intensity. 3/4 of the Axis tanks were burning or otherwise wrecked. As the day faded, the battle still continued. At El Akatia, we captured the dominating ridge. Our air force had almost annihilated the Luftwaffe. And now our entire strength pounded an enemy beginning to crack.
This is the BBC Home and Forces program. This is Bruce Belfridge. Here's some excellent news which has come during the past hour in the form of a communique from GHQ Carter. It says, the Axis forces in the Western Desert, after 12 days and nights of ceaseless attacks by our land and air forces, are now in full retreat.
That'll show 'em. There's plenty more where that came from.
The Africa Corps, utterly broken and possessed with no thought but flight, was hotly pursued. But the 8th Army was not only the thunder behind, but the lightning ahead. From hull-down positions on the road of escape, our guns and tanks knocked out on the first day of retreat over 50 of Rommel's remaining panzers without loss. He had already left 500 tanks behind him on the battlefield. We captured over 1,000 pieces of artillery. Up to 1,000 aircraft, from troop carriers to fighters, were wreckage on the ground. Italians in the south, abandoned by Rommel with neither food nor water, were swept up by us to the tune of 5 divisions. In the north, we took thousands of Germans. Among them were von Thoma, commander of the Africa Corps, Burckhardt, leader of the German parachutists, and 8 Italian generals. We buried 20,000 enemy dead. But in rendering our own dead the same final duty, great care had to be used. For the Germans, on several occasions, had attached booby traps to our men's bodies. Pursuit was remorseless. Every enemy column, on the coast road or in the desert, sometimes jammed head to tail, was bombed, blasted, and machine gunned. They tasted what they'd administered in France and Poland. Forces on the ground had crushed Rommel's flimsy rearguard and were sweeping on. After 2 days' pursuit, rain fell, and the chase was much impeded. Stretches of road turned to shallow streams.
Aircraft landing grounds were waterlogged. Despite the rains, however, on the fourth day we had taken, after a brief fight, Mersa Matruh, the first of the newly captured ports the Navy used to bring up supplies. The first heavily mined roads were encountered at Hellfire Pass, where the twisting road rises 700 feet. From then onwards to Benghazi, 450 miles further west, every path had been blown by the enemy, and every mile of road had to be examined and cleared of mines and obstructions. The engineers worked night and day. To Saloum, the Navy brought 1.5 million gallons of water and other vital supplies. By the 8th day, the enemy had been cleared out of Egypt. Tobruk, whose name is written deep in our Middle East campaigns, Tobruk, which we held as a fortress behind the enemy lines for 9 months and which had already changed hands twice, was ours once more. The date was November the 13th. In Cyrene, the Eighth Army passed from desert to a green countryside, which its Italian colonists had abandoned, and it was no more than a week between our taking Tobruk and entering Benghazi. At Benghazi we paused to replenish our supplies. The harbor, bombed by us for over 2 years, so regularly that the pilots called it doing the mail run, was now littered with sunken ships. Cranes, installations, and most of the quays were demolished. Yet the Navy and engineers worked to such good purpose that before long our ships were unloading. By sea and land, we were soon bringing up 3 million gallons of petrol a week and 8,000 tons of ammunition. While we'd been building up our strength, Rommel had been digging in at El Agheila. But after remaining 3 weeks preparing to fight, he changed his mind and withdrew as soon as he felt the full weight of our attack. His indecision achieved nothing except to intensify our new onslaught. From El Agheila to Tripoli is 530 miles. It took the Eighth Army 41 days to accomplish it. During that time, they fought several actions with Rommel's rearguards, putting down on one occasion a barrage rivaling that of El Alamein. But though we were delayed, our onward sweep was never in doubt. Just before the last stage began, General Montgomery said in an order of the day, "Nothing has stopped us since the Battle of Egypt began. Nothing will stop us now." And nothing did. 8 days later, we were fighting on the outskirts of Tripoli itself. The surrender of Tripoli by the governor of Libya and the mayor of the city extinguished the Italian overseas empire. Country by country, the British army had conquered it. Abyssinia, Eritrea, Italian Somaliland, Libya, Tripolitania. Not a single town now remained to them. the Eighth Army had advanced close on 1,400 miles, a feat unparalleled in military history. Throughout the battle and advance, for every casualty suffered, it had inflicted 5 on the enemy. In the words of Mr. Churchill, "You have altered the face of the war in the most remarkable way." What this must have meant in care and organization of the whole movement and maneuvers, what it must have meant in the endurance, tireless endurance, and self-denial of the troops, and in the fearless leadership in action, can only be appreciated by those who are actually on the spot. But I must tell you that your fame, the fame of the Desert Army, has spread throughout the world.
First pictures of the United States offensive against Japanese bases in the Aleutians. September 1942. A large U.S. convoy slips through Aleutian fog to a secret destination called Fireplace in code. A harbor close to Kiska, in easy bomber range. The blinker gives the signal, and under cover of fog, well-armed scouts scramble down the landing nets into ready assault boats. First step in America's advance in the Aleutians. Not many bomber miles away, Jap-occupied positions as yet are wholly unaware of this new American threat. Quickly, soldiers pour ashore with small arms and ammunition, swarming inward for reconnaissance to make sure the island is uninhabited. And right behind, the first waves of equipment and supplies, vehicles and heavier guns. The growing stream unloading quickly from Higgins boats, which shuttle back and forth from bulging transports in the harbor. Wave after wave in careful pre-planned schedules. Never stopping, the military cargo ferries bring ashore an endless stream of food and water, clothing, ammunition, and some of the vast quantities of fuel necessary to maintain a major landing force. Along the beach, protectors stay alert. Long recognized as important to both offensive and defensive North Pacific strategy, the 1,100-mile Aleutian string of largely uninhabited volcanic islands lies just above the shortest actual route from Seattle to Tokyo. The Great Circle Route, the way a plane would fly. About halfway along the 4,600-mile route is Dutch Harbor, and since 1938, defense outpost for the island chain and for Alaska. 1,800 sea miles from Seattle, but from Kiska, snatched by the Jap in June, only 625 miles for enemy bombers to fly and rain destruction. Once they got away with it. Dutch Harbor was the American frontier then, and in June it suffered severe damage. But now the United States has struck back, hard, ready to avenge Dutch Harbor. Under its commander, General Landrum, the advanced striking base rapidly digs into its new quarters. A permanent camp is laid out quickly on the treeless, inhospitable slopes above the barren island beaches, protected by anti-aircraft gunners on constant alert. Meantime, communications around the island are promptly established. Landing operations are steady, hard work, and toiling troops are all too ready for chow and what little relaxation the bleak and empty island offers. But not too much time out now. Hour after hour, supplies roll ashore. A small fleet of sea barges carrying the heavy derricks, cranes, and tractors and more supplies is brought into shore to form a dock. And crate upon crate, pile upon pile, jams up the beachhead, waiting to be carted off by trucks. More and more ammunition, and rows of U.S. bombs ashore and ready for the air offensive. The big cranes are put ashore, their unloading job finished, while tractors, bulldozers, and graders land to build the airport. And here it is, a long, flat area ideal for planes, except for a mountain stream overrunning its surface and forming many shallow lakes. Right away, the dozers go to work, scraping the volcanic earth into a dike at one side of the field, diverting the stream's course, making the field safe. The moment that engineers declare the soggy field ready for big, heavy flying fortresses, bomber squadrons will be called to go into immediate action. Almost midway between Dutch Harbor and Kiska, a new base at Fireplace in the Adrianoffs puts the U.S. Army Air Force within fighter range of Kiska and easy bomber range of Attu, farther west. And here they are, all ready, poised in battle line on the new airfield, hardly dry. The air arm of the United States forces in the Aleutians. Giant B-24s and B-17s, the Liberators and flying fortresses feared the world over, ready for attack when motors and guns have been carefully checked. Bombs fill up the bomb bays of one big plane after another. A message for the Japanese in a language he understands. It's the beginning of America's round now. They've got a base within range of the Jap. They've got equipment, planes, and ammunition. They've got men here, skilled veteran flyers who in an hour will be winging their four-motored sky fortresses over Jap-held territory. Welcome target for their bomb sites. In the dim Aleutian dawn, one plane after another fills with crew, eager and ready for attack. All set? Let's go. Above the clouds of the foggiest area in the world. Below, island after island of the Aleutian chain, where for years innocent-looking Jap fisher boats lurked in disguise, plotting shoals and reefs for future reference and use. Approaching the island of Kiska, machine gunners poised for action. In the harbor, a Nipponese warship. Without deviating from their course, the gunners scrape the decks. And now they're over the objective. Bomb bays open silently, ready for the signal. And there go American bombs hurtling downward. Japan's first taste of the United States advance in the Aleutians. That's the Jap base at Kiska, with serious fires started by the big bombs. Another load, recorded by slow-motion camera, shoots toward the surprised enemy below. A first sample of treatment he can expect daily from now on. The signs of their thorough handiwork blazing behind them, the American air fleet wings over and heads home.
Communique from the Aleutians. At dawn, a fleet of United States B-17 and B-24 bombers took off from an advanced Aleutian base with Japanese installations at Kiska as objective. Scattered enemy fire was encountered. One Japanese warship strayed. High explosive and demolition bombs were dropped with success on objectives, and several fires were observed. All attacking planes returned safely to their base.
The air fighters have come back to Fireplace. New notches on their guns. No casualties, despite grim reminders of the enemy's marksmanship. But they'll be going out again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. America's Aleutian offensive against Japan. An end of the beginning, and beginning of the end.